Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We welcome you warmly on behalf of the Omega Kappa chapter of Sigma to our 4th annual nursing webinar. It's hard to believe that this is the 4th one. We started this a couple of years ago, and it literally feels like a couple of years ago. My name is Cheryl Garrix Lloyd, and I have the wonderful privilege of being the president of this chapter. And so I thank you for joining us. And we are going to have a lovely conversation about nursing leadership and how we're going to be leveling up. So our speaker is here with us, and I want to say a very warm welcome to Dr. Sandra Garman-Bibb, who is actually our president-elect for Sigma International, and she steps into those shoes in November. And we are going to have a wonderful conversation this afternoon. She will be sharing with us a little bit about how we are going to be stepping this up, and to remind us that leadership doesn't necessarily mean management, because all of us have that leadership potential within us. And I think she said it best when she says, if we're leading, it's because we are serving. So listen up for that, and I want to thank you. Just a few quick reminders. We are spending an hour together, and I will ask you as best you can, please. There are many persons in here who are Samsung or I or something else. Can you possibly just rename yourself so we know you are? For future reference, if you should say to us you were in the session, we would not be able to verify that. And 2, we will have a little bit of discussion after she's done presenting. So we also want to ask you at that time to just make a notation while we're having this conversation, and then we'll be doing the question and answer section. You'll be able to share, and we'll be able to facilitate that conversation. But just before, in true Omega Kappa style, we cannot start without making sure your brains are engaged. So just in case you came on and you never had anything, you know what the good thing is about not having pencil and paper, although we still use that. Everybody has a smartphone or an iPad or a tablet that has the note-taking section. So we're going to do a little bit of brain warming up. I'm going to put something up on the screen, and I always give these out. You're going to have 1 minute and 30 seconds, and you will soon see what I require of you in that 1 minute and 30 seconds. So get your paper and your pencils ready, and or go right ahead and get your notepad ready. We always challenge, always, the members. And I have to put the disclaimer out there, Dr. Bibb, we allow you to participate, just that if we have a prize, you may not be able to get it. Unfortunately, we're ineligible as well. That would be myself and our secretary. But we want to say, if you're ready, then we're ready to go ahead. So we have a single word on here, and we're going to give you 1 minute and 30 seconds to see how many words you can come up with from that one word. And we are not doing below 4 letters. Everybody's with me so far? So we're doing 4-letter words and above. You'll get 1 minute and 30 seconds. Please let me know when your notepads are ready, and or your pencil and your paper, so I can tell you what the word is. Everybody's ready? Almost? And we almost certainly always try to ensure we have a small token for your participation. So let me know when you're ready. So just to be sure, we're saying 4-letter words and above. We're not doing 3. So if everybody's ready, we can go right ahead and get started. Are you ready? Somebody wants to open their microphone and tell me, are you ready? Type in the chat. We know you're here. Don't be afraid. All right. Somebody's saying we're ready.
Ready.
All right. Let's go. So I'm going to start the timer. We give you 1 single minute and 30 seconds. And let's go. Timer has started. 4-letter words and above. How are we doing?
Hot, but doing okay.
So 4-letter words and above, you have approximately 48 seconds left. All right, counting down. We're at 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so pencils and pens and notepads and styluses and all of those things down. So these are the instructions. Now you are going to type in the chat how many words you came up with. That's the number. So if you got 10, you got 8, you got 9, put that number in the chat. And we're going to be checking that while we're having the conversation. And if you have the most words, look out for a message from us. And guess what? We are nurses. We do evidence-based practice. So you're going to have to send us a screenshot of those words so we can verify how many words you actually wrote. So write your numbers in the chat first. And let's get this going to see how we're going to give this prize away. So again, we just want to say thank you for joining us for 4th annual webinar. We welcome you warmly. We thank our President-elect of Sigma, Dr. Sandra Garman-Bibb, for joining us today to talk to us. We always try to select a topic that's something that's topical in nursing. And one of the things that we've been working on is building our nursing leadership globally. So I'm going to hand over to our chapter secretary, Mrs. Sandra Chisholm Ford, who's going to do us the honor of introducing our speaker for this afternoon.
Good afternoon, OKers and soon-to-be OKers who are joining us this evening. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker for this evening, none other than Dr. Sandra Bibb, who is the owner and cultural competence consultant at Sandra Bibb Consulting organization. Her company provides education, consultation, and support to groups and organizations regarding cultural competence in nursing, regardless of their background. Dr. Bibb is an Army vet. She served in the US Navy as an active duty nurse. And of course, her name Garman is similar to one that we have here in Jamaica, the name of our Chief of Defense Staff. She retired in 2004, and trust me, she doesn't look like it, after serving 3 decades, and I think maybe I'm not seeing correctly, in the armed forces. However, while on active duty, she established and served in a number of leadership positions, and most of them were based on providing interprofessional healthcare teams with measures on how to develop culturally appropriate care. Also, she was very busy after retiring as she served in several roles in the uniformed services. She worked at the University of Bethesda, Maryland from 2004 to 2014. She was research director, department chair, associate dean, and in 2014, she was selected to serve as dean and professor at the College of Health Professionals at Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas. In January 2020, Dr. Bibb left this university and established her company, Sandra C. Garman-Bibb Consulting, in August of 2020. Dr. Bibb also served as a cultural competence consultant and as a nurse scientist consultant at Quorum IRB from 2012 to 2019, and she has over 30 years of experience in senior and executive leadership positions. And these were in the military, academic, and community settings, and she served in numerous national and international review committees and boards. Dr. Bibb was successful in being elected to the Sigma Theta Tau International's board of directors and served as director at large from 2015 to 2019, and was elected to the position of president-elect on the Sigma board for the 2021 to 2023 biennium. Dr. Bibb is also a fellow at the American Academy of Nursing, and she's recognized for her research initiatives and published works related to population health, access to care, and healthcare disparities. Colleagues, friends, well-wishers, OKers, can you join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Dr. Sandra Bibb, my namesake?
Thank you, Andra, so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead now and share my slides. And I want to tell you, you're so kind when you said that I did not look like I had retired from the military when I did. And what I need to tell you is that I was 2 years old when I was commissioned. So, you know, that's why I look the way I do. But it is my great honor to be here with you today, this afternoon, and talk to you about leadership, specifically servant leadership. I'm going to be talking about leadership. I'm going to be talking about the differences between leadership and management, but I'm also going to be talking specifically about servant leadership in terms of leveling up to thrive and inspire others. And as I move through this talk, I invite you, I encourage you to really be very reflective and introspective. And if you still have the pen or the stylus or the paper, is as I'm moving through some of this information that I'm going to be presenting to you, if there are thoughts that come to mind, go ahead and jot those down so that we have those towards the end of this talk for our discussion, for our conversation. I'd like to start by sharing this definition of leadership with you from Robin Sharma. Robin Sharma says that leadership is not about executive position or title. It's about connection and influence. Leadership, Robin Sharma says, at its highest, is all about adding value to the world and blessing lives through the work that you do. So in essence, what this quote communicates to me, and I want to communicate to you, is that we're all leaders because of the work that we do in terms of adding value. We're all leaders because of our involvement in connection and influence. And that's the stance I want to use as we move through this talk together. It's important for me to point out here that leadership and management are not synonymous. The best managers are leaders, but not all managers are leaders. And as we move through this content, I hope that will pop out to you in larger ways as we reflect on that definition that I just showed you from Sharma that says that it's not a position, it's not a title that makes us a leader. In fact, it is something that's very different. And that difference is our connection, our influence, and how we add value to the lives of others. Now, in this blog post, Matt Gavin wrote about leadership versus management and what the difference is. And he says that referring to someone as a leader has a more fluid meaning, while the title manager often denotes a specific role within an organization's hierarchy. He says that the leader innovates, develops, and focuses on people, while the manager administers, maintains, and focuses on systems and structure. And again, the best managers are leaders, but not all managers are leaders. McGaffin also says that leadership is the result of action. If you act in a way that inspires, encourages, or engages others, you are a leader. Again, it doesn't matter your title or position. He also explains that leadership is a quality that needs to be shaped through developing emotional intelligence and learning how to influence others. Professionals of all levels can build greater self-awareness and understand how to bring out the best in themselves and the best in others. And this bringing out the best in ourselves and others refers back to part of our title tonight in terms of us leveling up so that we can thrive ourselves. And in thriving, we can inspire others to thrive and achieve their goals, bringing out the best in ourselves at the same time that we are bringing out the best in others through inspiration, encouragement, and engagement. Now, this is a photo that I took a little while ago. I probably taken a photograph of this footbridge probably 20, 30 times on different days. This is a footbridge that I walk across when I do my walks in my community. And when I go out and travel, if I see a footbridge, I always capture that picture because it reminds me that I'm always being and becoming. Walking across a bridge reminds me that I have not arrived, that I am being and becoming. But there's something for me that's special about crossing that bridge that demonstrates that I'm in progress. I'm a work in progress. And Daniel Goleman says that the best leaders don't know just one style of leadership. They're skilled at several and have the flexibility to switch between styles as circumstances dictate. And that's how I see my being and becoming. I believe that leadership is a journey. It's being and becoming what is needed to make a difference and influencing transformation as circumstances dictate. So, in terms of leadership, influence, and transformation, what do current circumstances dictate in terms of how we lead? I'd like to start by showing you some excerpts from a foreword written by Stephen Covey in a 2002 publication of a book titled Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness. And this 2002 publication was the 25th anniversary edition. So this is over 20 years ago in terms of what circumstances currently dictate. Stephen Covey said that there's a great movement taking place throughout the world today. He identifies it as the dramatic globalization of markets and technology. And 20 years later, we see that still happening. He also goes on to say that this dramatic globalization of markets and technology then have fueled the tidal wave of change and created the second force, the force of timeless, universal principles that have and always will govern all enduring success. Principles, he says, that give air and life and creative power to the human spirit, that produces values in markets, organizations, families, and most significantly, individuals' lives. Rigzucha, a nurse, wrote in a March 2021 Transcultural Nursing Society blog post that it is important to note that who we are and how we care is based on how we have been raised and nurtured in the culture of nursing. We are indeed living in an unusual time, a time of weather extremes, political divisions, racial justice, COVID-19, vaccine administrations, isolation, uncertainty, and of course, hope. Alice Canavesi and Ilana Manelli wrote in a September 2021 publication in the journal Employee Responsibilities and Rights about a systematic literature review and network analysis they did on servant leadership. These authors wrote that servant leadership is a form of moral-based leadership where leaders tend to prioritize the fulfillment of the needs of followers. Although the concept is not new, it has received growing consideration in the last decade. They wrote this in 2021, due to the fact that it can positively affect a series of individual and organizational outcomes, such as job satisfaction and organizational commitment. And Paulina Neal wrote in a blog post titled, "Why Servant Leadership is More Important Than Ever," that the pandemic is affecting us all individually, organizationally, and societally. We are having to find new ways of working, and normal business concerns are overlaid by added challenges, different ways of operating, keeping staff safe, and handling sickness, layoffs, furloughs, and loss of income. Wider societal impacts include adverse effects on the global economy. This all calls for a more comprehensive, communal leadership approach, leadership that is focused on serving others. And I believe that it's this leadership, the leadership that we're talking about tonight, servant leadership, that brings us hope in the current circumstances that we live and practice in. Servant leadership, leveling up to thrive and inspire others. That's what we're focused on tonight. And as we look at this focus, it's important to all be on the same page in terms of what do we mean by leveling up? The Cambridge Dictionary says to level up is to go to a higher level. So we're all leaders functioning at a level of leadership. And tonight, I'm presenting this content to you and asking you to reflect on it and think about, and let's talk about how we level up to entertain some of these characteristics of servant leadership that I'm going to present to you, so that we can go to a higher level of adding value to the lives of others, a higher level of influence and connection, a higher level of achieving our goals, achieving the best that we can be while we support others in becoming the best that they can be. And what I'm talking about is thriving, not surviving, but thriving. Because to thrive is to grow vigorously, to progress towards or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances, even the circumstances that I presented to you earlier, that have been going on for the past 20 years, the circumstances that we live in and practice in. How do we thrive in those circumstances? How do we thrive in that environment? And how do we inspire others to thrive, to be and be becoming who they need to be at this particular time in these particular circumstances? And I'm presenting to you that servant leadership is an approach to help us do that. Asana says here that servant leadership is an approach that focuses on serving others rather than managing for results, to create an environment where team members can thrive. Now, here's a picture of another footbridge that I took. And again, I mentioned to you that footbridges remind me of being and becoming. And if you look at this photo, you can see people down at the opposite end. I'm just entering the footbridge, but as I'm crossing it, I'm thinking about being and becoming. I'm thinking about accomplishing the goals that have been laid out in front of me. That's what a leader is all about. In a 2018 publication on servant leadership in action, Blanchard and Broadwell wrote this: when people lead at a higher level, and that's what we're talking about as we talk about leveling up, they make the world a better place, because in addition to results and relationships, their goals are focused on the greater good. This requires a special kind of leader, a servant leader. And it's in this book that Blanchard helps us understand that a servant leader is not about abdicating all responsibilities and saying, I'm going to do what others want to do or allow them to do. And we're going to see as we move through that a servant leader has vision and has to cast the vision. But Blanchard points out two distinct things about a servant leader: that a servant leader, of course, focuses on leadership, but is strategic. And a servant leader is a servant meeting the needs of others, ensuring that others thrive, as well as the leader. And a servant leader is operational. And this operational piece is reminiscent of what we looked at earlier, is that the best managers are leaders. So there may be some operational aspect to servant leadership, but all managers are not leaders. And as we move through this and talk more about the characteristics of servant leadership, I think that will become clearer in terms of the intent of me presenting that in this talk and continuing to reiterate it. So the servant leadership model was developed by Robert K. Greenleaf in 1970. The approach describes an aspiration to lead that is driven by a desire to serve others. Important to note is that Greenleaf proposed that both individuals and organizations can be servant leaders. He also pointed out that a servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong, the people and the environments, because the environments, when they're healthy environments, or environments that people can grow in, people can thrive in, and people or how missions get accomplished. So that's what servant leadership is all about, helping people grow and develop, looking after their well-being so that they thrive in the communities that they belong in. Greenleaf also wrote that the best test, even though it's difficult to administer in terms of the effectiveness of servant leadership, is to ask, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So think about this in terms of what the current circumstances dictate. Greenleaf wrote this in 1970. And as we look at some of the questions he proposes as the best test of servant leadership in action, these are questions that we're asking ourselves today in the current circumstances that we live and practice in. Are people who are being served growing as people? Are they becoming healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in our society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So in 1970, when Greenleaf introduced this premise, it was relatively vague when compared to other leadership models that we may be familiar with in terms of practical steps and day-to-day application. And across the years, there have been many people who have interpreted the concept of servant leadership to offer more specifics about what servant leadership looks like in practice. I'd like to look at two of those interpretations with you. The first by Larry Spears in 2010, and the work that Spears has done in developing 10 characteristics of effective caring leaders has provided the foundation for much of the work that's been done in servant leadership. And then we'll look at what Dr. Josh Axe says in terms of servant leadership, the ultimate key to a healthy business. And this was published in August of 2022 in a leader's blog. So as I said, through years of research, Larry Spears, the founder of Spears Center for Servant Leadership, found that those who practice servant leadership share 10 common characteristics. Now, as I share these characteristics with you, if you haven't had an opportunity already to begin reflecting and synthesizing some of what I'm saying to you in terms of the current state, the current circumstances that we live and practice in, and what is needed now in these current circumstances, I absolutely encourage you to reflect on these 10 common characteristics that Spears attributes to servant leadership. But let's just think about these characteristics in terms of how we lead. And remember, we're all leaders. It's not about a position. It's not about a title. It's about connection. It's about influence. It's about us adding value to others. It's also about us being and becoming the best that we can be as we inspire others to be and become the best that they can be. And then as you look at this servant leader circle, and I present these 10 characteristics to you, I also invite you to recall what Greenleaf said about servant leadership. Servant leadership can be an individual or it can be an organization. So these characteristics can be common characteristics for a leader, a servant leader, but also common characteristics for an organization that provides a healthy environment that encourages and supports and inspires growth and well-being. So let's move through these characteristics, starting with listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, and building community. These are the 10 common characteristics that Spears identified associated with those that practice servant leadership, both individuals and organizations. Now, as I move us to the next slide, let's look at what Dr. Josh Axe writes about building on the work of Spears as he describes these modern day characteristics of servant leadership in practice. In other words, what should these characteristics look like in the circumstances that we're living and practicing in right now in servant leaders as individuals and servant leader organizations? So let's start with the first characteristic, which is to listen. Axe says that servant leaders commit to asking questions, but more importantly, they actively listen to the answers provided. By doing so, they facilitate constructive conversation and better comprehend the needs of the person or group. Additionally, listening well allows time for reflection and thoughtful response. In terms of empathy, Axe encourages us to show empathy. We were first encouraged to listen, but now we're encouraged to show empathy. Being empathic is part of emotional intelligence, he says. Emotional intelligence increases by actively working on self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. Empathy involves social interaction and practicing compassion, sympathy, concern, or understanding. So when looking at empathy and the encouragement to show empathy, we can absolutely see that there's an opportunity for us to thrive and grow, develop, be, and become through self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship management, but also an opportunity for us to create an environment for others to grow, be, and become, and to thrive. In terms of healing, Dr. Axe says that we should focus on purpose because that can bring long-term healing to those who are searching for a sense of fulfillment. Empathy, awareness, listening, and community building are essential tools to build trusting relationships. The healing process includes providing emotional support, encouraging team members, and seeing the best in employees by recognizing gifts and talents. In terms of awareness, he encourages us to have self-awareness and social awareness. Self-awareness focuses on the recognition of one's emotions and how they impact others. And social awareness is recognizing, understanding, and caring about the feelings of others. Again, this awareness points to our growth and development in terms of being and becoming, but also how we inspire the growth, development, and being and becoming of others, leveling up to thrive and inspire others. In terms of persuasion, he encourages us to persuade with positive influence. In the servant leadership model, authority is decentralized. Instead of deploying a top-down command, servant executives and managers guide with influence and persuasion. Here is that reminder that leadership is not about a title or position, but managers, the best managers are leaders, can be servant leaders. So he goes on to say that persuasive leaders actively listen and look for commonalities and build bridges. In terms of the conceptualization, we are encouraged to cast vision and conceptualize. Vision, he says, is a key component of servant leadership. Without a vision, people within a community cannot be called to achieve a collective purpose. It's important that stewards, servant leaders, establish a daily visualization practice that helps everyone in the environment to understand the organization's direction. So this visualization practice helps that servant leader to determine and communicate the organization's direction. In terms of foresight, he encourages servant leaders in today's circumstances to use foresight as a strategic tool. Having foresight means using analytical thinking skills to visualize potential outcomes in the future. Essentially, foresight is a strategic decision-making tool that proactively guides the organization in the right direction. So as we look at these characteristics of the servant leader, we see that reminder of what Blanchard said about the servant leader in terms of leadership and strategic and servant operational. In terms of stewardship, we are encouraged to act as a steward. Stewards feel a sense of duty and obligation to humbly serve the needs of others. In action, they practice accountability and discipline while sharing their wisdom. In terms of a commitment to the growth of people, Acts just puts it plainly when he says, develop people. Nurturing the personal and professional development of community members is a core tenet of servant leadership. Recognizing a person's full potential and providing guidance on how to achieve it. Through consistent motivation, inspiration, and encouragement, managers and executives can influence others to become the best versions of themselves. And in terms of building community, he encourages us in the current circumstances that we are living and practicing in to cultivate trusting communities. He writes that servant leaders cultivate communities where people feel a sense of trust and belonging. Organizations built to last have people who put the needs of others ahead of their own. The key is to eliminate self-interested behavior and lead from a place of values and ethics. So we've looked at servant leadership in terms of what it is, the characteristics that Spears uncovered, and we've looked at what Acts has to say about what servant leadership practice, both individual and organization, looks like in a healthy business in today's circumstances. As I close this talk and move us to a time where we can talk about a little bit of this, I want to go back to this article, this systematic literature review and network analysis that these authors performed. And they drew some conclusions, but they also make some recommendations that I'd like to share with you. They write that the analysis conducted in this study in 2021 on servant leadership, a systematic literature review and network analysis, indicate that the interpretation of servant leadership prevailing in the literature is positive due to the promising attitudinal, behavioral, and performance outcomes that it can produce on followers. They write that scholars should examine the potential drawbacks of servant leadership, assess its validity across industries, as well as identify the best scenario where it can be implemented. And managers should consider the importance of promoting servant leadership in employment settings to develop specific skills and ultimately improve an organizational climate of empowerment. They conclude that the servant leadership approach may be particularly effective in the post-COVID-19 scenario or in contexts characterized by a high degree of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the circumstances that we live in and practice in today. They write, in these environments, leaders struggle to make all decisions, thus requiring the proactiveness and motivational orientation of all employees, which have been identified as important mediators to positive followers' outcomes in a servant leadership research. So I present my case, and now we'll have an opportunity to talk about servant leadership leveling up to thrive and inspire others. I believe that servant leadership is an approach that is effective for the circumstances that we live and practice in today, because it encourages us to go to a higher level in how we lead, how we connect, how we influence, how we add value to others. It encourages us to be focused on these characteristics and growing vigorously so that we can inspire and motivate others to grow. And as we are being and becoming the best that we can be, others can also be and become the best that they can be. This approach that focuses on serving others rather than managing for results to create an environment where team members can thrive, I believe is an appropriate approach for where we are today. I appreciate your time and attention. As I moved through the slides, you saw that I had the references fully annotated on each of the slides, but I just want to show you this reference list and move on from the presentation. I'll stop sharing now. And we have time for, okay, so I'm going to put the slide back up with the 10 characteristics. Let me
No,
go back
don't put it back, Dr. Babe. Don't put it back. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, I just saw that pop through. Okay, all right.
Yes,
I won't
all
put it
right.
back. I
We
won't put it back.
we'll come right back because they want it, but just give me 1 second before we put that up.
Okay.
All
okay.
right. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I noticed that you said it was not a new concept, but is it
No.
that we are now embracing it just a bit more? So before we get into just about that, I'm calling on my VP, who he's probably at work maybe, and he won't be able to turn his camera on. But just before we do all the other activities to close out, Javon, I'm putting you on standby for the vote of thanks. So now that we're going to have a little conversation, I'm taking a little bit of privilege to maybe throw out a question I had for you while others are thinking what they'd like to ask. I already see one hand that went up. I don't know who you are, please. I see a Samsung SM. I wanted to ask, is servant leadership something that we consider under mentorship? Because in the scheme of mentoring, it is said that the mentor should also be able to learn something from the mentee. So is there a scope within servant leadership to facilitate building mentoring relationships?
Absolutely. In terms of that commitment to the growth of people, okay, that goes to the mentee, but more importantly, that whole awareness piece that encourages us to be more self-aware, to be more introspective as leaders. No matter what leadership model we're in, I believe that that's extremely important in terms of us learning and growing. And then the listening, really authentically listening to what people have to say, that generates learning. So I'm a proponent of mentors and mentees, but I also am a proponent of coaching as well as group mentoring, because I believe that we all learn from each other. And in this servant leadership model, that's what it's about. It's about sharing leadership, sharing, learning from each other, recognizing and acknowledging that everybody has gifts and talents. You know, everybody has strengths and areas for improvement. So absolutely, I think that mentoring is a very strong part of the servant leadership model.
All right, thank you so much. The person who had their hand up, you may go right ahead, please. That would be, there was a Samsung SM, I think AO before Sandra. All right, go right ahead, Sandra.
I want to say, Dr. Babe, I was enthralled. Very, very, very good presentation. I would love, though, if you could just to repeat the second to last slide. There's something on it I want to ask your professional opinion on, because what I have been noticing is that, I'm not sure if it happens in where you've been, but we find that our colleagues have, our leaders or nurse leaders here, tend to want to feel threatened by their peers or juniors. So they do not share as much. They do not embrace servant leadership because they think that if they share with you, you're going to take away their position, you're going to shine brighter than them. And it does impact the service and the relationships that are necessary for the company to thrive.
Yes, and what you're talking about is a certain level of insecurity that happens, and I go back to the how servant leadership applies to an organization, represents a healthy organization. That's in this day and age, that's what we're talking a lot about, healthy organizations, creating those environments, because there is insecurity, there is uncertainty, there is complexity, there's all of that. But again, I push forward on that awareness piece, that self-awareness piece, that reflection, that introspection. It takes courage to start that. You're talking about some of the managers and not wanting to share or whatever else, but just to begin to look at ourselves. And now I move almost into my cultural competence world and say, hey, these are some bias, these are some things that I'm doing, these are some things that are happening. It doesn't make me a bad person, but these things do not create an environment where people can thrive, where people can grow. Because if I'm concerned, or if I'm afraid, or if I see that somebody is pushing me down, then that's not a comfortable place for me. And so I'm excited to have this opportunity to talk about this tonight, because it's not just about the individuals. And as I said, all managers are not necessarily leaders, because even if we took the servant off of some of these characteristics, all leaders should really have that introspective piece, that listening piece. We can look at the commitment to the growth of people. So these characteristics, that are under this umbrella of servant leadership, I think we all could look at those and say, oh, wow, good leaders, this is what they do. They want people to grow, they want people to develop, they want to learn from people. So, presenting this in terms of helping us recognize, okay, what's happening in ourselves, but also what's happening in the organization that we're part of. And is there anything that we can do? And I always believe that it starts with me in terms of modeling behavior. But I understand exactly what you're speaking to. And it's a very difficult place. And I've been there many times where it's clear that insecurity is manifesting because of uncertainty. And that generally goes back to the overall environment. What's the environment like? That's what I've seen. It goes back to that environment. Does the environment say, we want everybody to grow and thrive and do well? We're a team. It's not about, self-interest, all of the things that I talked about. That's what I believe that goes back to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bibb. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bibb. I agree. And I noticed in the chat, Michelle says that servant leaders are confident, secure, and self-aware, and it takes a level of maturity.
Yes.
So I agree with her, and I agree with you that it's your environment. Because I had a second point about the phrase nurses eat their young. It looks at, I would say, as you said, the environment. Are we working in an environment that facilitates acceptance of all of us thriving or being inspired or recognizing that we can all lead? It's not a competition, and that if one does well, then everybody should be doing well based on that. And then as each one inspires and the others strive, it will be an environment where we're all doing well. So I really appreciate that. And I've been listening. I'm just throwing it out now to anybody else in case we have a comment or a question before we get.
Can I make a comment on
You
what
can
you
go
just
right
said
ahead.
and what's in the
Yes.
chat is that in terms of the confidence piece that someone wrote in the chat, see, I believe that comes from the self-awareness and the introspection, but also we, most of us are part of hierarchical organizations. And so we're going to have the positions and the titles, and people have functions and positions and titles, just like I have the title of president-elect, but that doesn't mean that that elevates me, you see, in any way. If we can get to that place where we have duties and responsibilities that are associated with the position, but it doesn't mean that we're not on the team and you know, we're all there together to make things happen. And in order for people to feel okay about that, it really does involve that introspective piece, that being okay with yourself and not being so concerned about the title. I mean, you've got the responsibilities, but being more concerned about the vision and the mission and everybody growing and thriving. Yes.
Agreed. Thank you so much. All right. So while you are thinking, anybody, because you're able to put it in the chat as we are going to be wrapping up, I will have 2 small activities to complete. But before I do both of those, I want to hand over to Javon to just do our official vote of thanks. So over to you, Javon.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everyone. So, on behalf of the Omega Kappa chapter of Sigma, Dr. Sandra Bim, I just want to say a special thank you for taking the time out to be here with us virtually to share with us on servant leadership, leveling up, thriving to inspire others. This is a key and relevant topic we need in today's society. And as persons, as leaders, you know, it's a timely reminder as to how we persons as leaders should operate in our different environment or different space, workspace, or something like that. Because really and truly, listening to this conversation, we really need to have listening to the conversation per se. You know, we shouldn't even drop off the word servant, you know, because sometimes we forget as leaders, we are really servant of the people that we are in place of, right? So we just really want to thank you for bringing across the servant leadership topic and also sharing with us the 10 characteristics. And when I go through the characteristics, I was listening and I was saying, wow, really and truly, these are some of the things that we, as leaders, sometimes we tend to lack, and we fail to find ways and means to get back to the drawing board and remember these characteristics. So we really want to thank you for this enlightening presentation. Also want to thank each and everyone for joining us here to get this informative information and how we can use this information to impact ourselves and others. Because as leaders, individually we are leaders in our own different circles, so we can never tell when this information will be very relevant. So thanks again for joining. All right, and over to you, Madam P.
All right, so thank you very much, Javon. And so as we are preparing to close off, in true Omega Kappa fashion, again, we are not always closing off suddenly without involving anybody who is joining. So if you were a little late, we thank you for joining us. We thank you for listening. We thank you for noting all that has been shared. And we have Miss Renee Brooks to thank and congratulate for everybody who participated. We had a quick thing. I'm sure Dr. B probably had about 20 words, but unfortunately, you know, the speaker is exempt from the prize. So we started off by asking persons to just get their brains clicking and saying, we put the word leadership up. We ask you to give us as many words as you could find from leadership, starting at 4-letter words, and then you put your numbers in the chat. Ms. Brooks had 19. And so we messaged her, she sent in her list, she did have 19. So we want to congratulate her. But we have one more prize. So just before we go, we want to ask you if you're ready to participate. So I want you to listen carefully to the instructions. I have 3 questions. You're going to give us the answer in the chat while I am doing the other things, but we don't want the answers one at a time. You have to give me the 3 answers at one time, or you are not in the running for the prize. Everybody's with me? So think of your 3 answers, type all 3 at once, put 1, 2, 3, and you put you in the running for the chat. So I want you to listen carefully to the questions. Are you ready? When you're ready, turn your microphone on and say, ready.
Ready.
All right, wonderful. So now I want everybody to be on the same page with me. Question 1, question 2, question 3. So the very first question is this. In her presentation, Dr. Bibb highlighted to us some definitions and some terms that people use to bring out servant leadership. In one of them, there was a quotation from 2021 that said, servant leadership is a particular type of leadership. So I want you to tell me what type of leadership they say that would have fallen under. That was from 2021. So the first question is, what type of leadership did they say servant leadership fell under? Question 2, in sharing from Robert Greenleaf, she gave us a foreword by Dr. Stephen Covey, I believe. But just in case you missed it, everybody here perhaps knows, and I'm going to throw this one in that didn't come from her per se, but Dr. Covey has another book that's very famous. What is the name of that book? That's question 2. And then question 3 is that she gave us 10 characteristics of servant leaders, and you need to give me 5 of those. All
That's
right,
why
so
you wouldn't let me put the slide back
that's
up.
why, Dr. Bibb. So let's go back. Everybody's ready? So question 1 was, what type of leadership did they say that servant leadership falls under? Question 2, what's the name of the very famous book by Stephen Covey? And question 3, give me 5 of the characteristics that were given out of the 10 on servant leadership. So you may go right ahead and start typing. Remember to put all 3 answers at once in the chat. While you are typing that, I've been saying it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. I'm going to say it again. We are not collecting emails in our chat here today. All right. So while you are working on that, I'm waiting to see so we can know how will the prize be given out. When we've done that, then we may just ask Dr. Bibb to go ahead, because there was a ask in the chat to put them back, but she will do that after you've answered the questions to make sure everybody walks away having those 10 characteristics sealed into their mind, so you can know which ones have you been practicing, which ones you're doing but you didn't realize what the name was, and which ones do we need to work on. The point of today is for us to walk away and recognize the servant leaders within us and to start building those around us so that we're all doing well. All right, so thank you, Michelle. Michelle likes your explanation of the servant leadership, Dr. Bibb, and thinks the session was very beneficial. And we are waiting. So number 1, Daisy, you put number 1, but I don't see the answer, just see the 1. So we're reminding everybody, put all 3 answers at the same time to the questions. And if you missed it, the questions are, under what type of leadership did they highlight in 2021 that servant leadership is a part of? What's the name of the very famous book by Stephen Covey? And give me 5 of the 10 characteristics of servant leaders. All right, how are we doing? People are checking. I see typing, but I don't see the answers coming up yet. All right. All right. Shanice says she's not doing so good. All right. Mrs. Wade says she wasn't here from the start, so she kind of has to probably guess for number one. Denise, you're asking if it's by example. No, Dr. Bibb gave us that very thing, and it says that servant leadership can be considered a part of, it was a hyphenated word, leadership, right? And then she gave us these, the books are correct so far, and we are getting those characteristics. So just checking if there's anybody. If we don't have anybody who got number one, we may have to default and give a first person an answer. So I'm going to repeat it, and we have another minute. What type of leadership would servant leadership be considered a part of? And the book by Stephen Covey, and 5 of those 10 characteristics. So we have another minute while we're counting down. Should I be singing the Jeopardy song? I'm not so great at singing at all. All right. There are a lot of us in here. Nobody else. We have 2 people so far. Daisy, you're not finished. I didn't see number 3's answer. All right, the time is counting down. Nobody wants the prize? I know you missed the first one. That's why I make notes when we're listening to presentations. You know, there's always a quiz. And when I give you the answer, people are gonna be like, oh yes, she did say that. All right. All right, so we're waiting. Minute is almost done. And then we're gonna give the answers. So we may have to think about splitting the one prize between Denise and Marvet, who both responded. And Marvet wasn't here from the beginning. All right, Shanice, not sure about number one either. All right, so our minute is up, and let's start at the beginning. On that slide, it spoke about servant leadership being a part of moral-based leadership. Is that correct, Dr. Bibb?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. There goes Denise shaking her head. Now you remember Denise. All right. And then a lot of people, I listened keenly to what Mr. Covey had to say in his foreword, because it was Mr. Greenleaf's book. But we do know, Mr. Covey, a lot of people for the 7 habits of highly effective people. And so people got that right. And then the 10 characteristics, if Dr. Bibb is able to share that slide again, I'll ask her so that we can all see what they are. So by default, technically, nobody won the prize because nobody remembered moral-based leadership. She had an other slide, I think, that spoke about all of us being a part of our culture and in nursing where we practice. But somebody had asked earlier to see those 10 characteristics again. So we're just going to go up to that. And
Can you see them?
yes, we can. And to congratulate everybody who participated, because you did get 5 out of that 10 correct. So it asked us to listen, and I like that listening was the very first one, and active listening at that, not just hearing to respond, but listening. Empathy, healing, awareness, which includes self, and persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, growth of people, and building of communities. So thank you very much, Dr. Bibb. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We are encouraging all of you as you walk away today from our session. What we really want is for all of us to be able to practice servant leadership We do not need to be managers to be leaders. Dr. Bibb also highlighted that. And there's a leader within all of us. And so we have to work on that. We need to build our nursing leadership. We need to find ourselves at these tables. We need to be invaluable. We need to be missed. And when we get there, they need to say, why were you not here before? And we also need to start recognizing that if one of us looks great and we're building each other up, then we all look great and we'll all get there. And there is power in numbers. So as we close out, I want to share this quiz I found with you. You're going to be able to do it by yourself. It comes from Springer Publications and it's in a blog. It's a leadership quiz. You are able to click it and get it done. And it's going to tell you the interpretation of your scores. So that's for each of you as we close off. Have a look at it. Similar to you're looking at those 10 characteristics and seeing, where am I? Where do I need to be and how do I get there? And we're going to close off with Dr. Bibb's bridge. Think of it like we're walking across. I'm starting at this point and I need to get to that point. What do I need to do in between to successfully get across that bridge? And how will I become a servant leader? What legacy will I have left behind? Or will I be a living legacy because I would have been a part of my own growth and my own leadership development and several other people's. So on behalf of Omega Kappa, we thank you, Dr. Bibb. We thank everybody for joining us. If you missed it or missed any part of it, we ask you to go back to our YouTube channel. We are on YouTube as the Omega Kappa chapter of Sigma, and you'll be able to see all of the presentation today or share it with somebody who may have missed it, who really wanted to be here. So from Jamaica, we say we are okay, because we are Omega Kappa, and we thank you again and have a very wonderful rest of your evening, everybody. You may open your mics or your cameras and say bye. Let's have a little bit of noise. Thank you, Dr. Bibb, and we'll see you in November.
Yes, ma'am.
Bye,
Thank you so
Sharon.
much.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Wonderful.
Bye, everybody.
See you in November.